Well, we're in chapter 34 of the book of Exodus. We started out back in the book of Revelation and went backwards through the New Testament. We looked at some of the prophets and some of the things that happened before the New Testament, and then we realized we needed to not continue to go backwards because it was too confusing, and decided to come forward from the book of Genesis and try to do a more intelligent way of approaching the early part of the Old Testament, trying to use a consecutive order of historical events. And of course, it's going to be very difficult, as many of the things in Kings and Samuel intertwine with these other books. And so we'll do the best we can using the chronological Bible, if we will, as a guide as much as we can. But today, again, we're in Exodus chapter 34, and I think there's some really interesting lessons to be had here in Exodus chapter 34. First of all, you remember that Moses has gone down and he smashed the tablets that God has given to him. And if I were going to preach a message on chapter 34 today, I would say, take 2 tablets and call me in the morning. And you'll see why in just a minute. But the spiritual truth that I want to drive home with this is there's always a consequence for misbehavior. Now, Moses had a righteous anger towards the people of Israel for making the molten calf, and the anger that he had towards Aaron. But he smashed the tablets that God had given to him. If you go back to Exodus chapter 24, verse 12, God had cut out the tablets and had with his own finger written the commandments on them. And if you'll remember the little trick that I taught you, the fact that he wrote on the front and the back of those tablets, so that it wasn't just 5 tablets on the right and 5 tablets on the left, 5 commandments on the left and 5 commandments on the right, but rather their commandments were on the front and back. Now, whether they were the same commandments on front and back, or whether he needed the space in order to write out what he was writing out, but nevertheless, the tablets that we always see pictured is probably not accurate, because God wrote on both sides. In any case, Moses smashed those tablets that God gave him, and this time he tells Moses, you're going to have to cut out some new tablets. Now, he wasn't going to trust Moses to put the commandments on them. He said, take those tablets, cut them out, and see me in the morning. So there you are. Take 2 tablets and call me in the morning. Obviously, Moses goes up on the mountain, and God then reiterates the 10 commandments on these tablets that Moses has made. So we have a consequence, looking at verse 7, consequence of misbehavior. But we also see the consequences of the misbehavior of the people of God and the people that are not God's people. And you say, well, what do you mean? Well, a lot of people have really struggled this question about why God would allow the sins of the fathers to go down multiple generations. After all, that's not merciful, and that doesn't seem just. But that's not what it's saying. It's not saying he's going to punish the children of those. He says there's going to be a consequence on the multiple generations after bad parenting. Let me say that again for you. This is not about God punishing people for what their father did or what their mother did. This is a case of the consequences of the bad illustration, the bad example that moms and dads can set for their children, the bad upbringing, the bad training that will bring consequences for generations to come. Now think about that as a mom or dad. If you're a bad parent, and you don't lead your children spiritually, and you don't give them the right kind of guidance, it can affect generations of children to follow. Those are pretty serious consequences, aren't they? Well, let's go on down in chapter 34, verses 10. We find that God's going to enter into a new covenant. And here again, I want to remind you that God speaks about the fact that he is going to drive out the inhabitants of the land for the Israelites and with the Israelites being the tool that he's going to use to drive them out. And he reiterates the fact that there's going to be people in the promised land, but that he's going to be with them to take care of that problem. And I think it's also important for you to look at verse 16 as you study chapter 34. When you look at chapter 34 and you look at verse 16, you see the consequences of bad influence, of not being in the world, but being of the world, intermarriage, being unequally yoked. All of these principles are clearly stated here, that even though they're applying to the people in the land, the promised land, that's no different than the society we live in today. If our friendship circles are those that are leading us in the wrong direction, it will have consequences. Now, that doesn't mean we can't put ourselves amongst them to witness to them, but we got to be careful that we don't have them changing us more than we're changing them. And certainly this speaks very highly about men and women picking mates that are spiritually compatible with them. I can't tell you how many times I've seen women think that they can change a man after they marry him, and you can't. Very seldom happens. It certainly does happen occasionally, but overall, usually, if the husband is not saved, the wife winds up drifting away from the church because the husband doesn't support her in that activity, and vice versa. So we see a good illustration here of God saying, don't intermarry with these Canaanites, Hittites, Jebusites, and all the other sites, but stay pure as a nation, stay equally yoked with one another, and don't enter into covenants with those that are not believers. I can't tell you how many businessmen have made that mistake of joining in a partnership or a corporation with those that are not of the same faith, and as a result their business was not able to stay as it had been originally intended to be a Christian business. So, wonderful lessons in chapter 34. Hope that you'll take time to study through. Hope that you'll look carefully at all of the words. Hope that you'll remember there's always consequences. Moses had to cut out some more tablets because he smashed the ones that God had made. And there's consequences of being unequally yoked and entering into covenants with people who are not spiritually the same as you are. And that's my thought for the day. Don't forget, if you want to get yesterday's, you can click on the left-hand window at the very end of this video. And if you want to share your faith with others, you can click on the right-hand window. Or if you just want to know how to have peace in a troubled and broken world, click on the right-hand window and see the 3 circles illustration. God bless you and have a great day.